Well, hello there. Welcome back to season 2 of Breaking the Blocks. It is so good to be back. I'm your host, Rachel Pierman, and thank you so much for joining us for this season of the podcast. If you are watching us on YouTube, thank you very much. I would love you to think about subscribing to the channel because it's always nice to have the gang growing in numbers. And of course, if you want to give me any likes, ding, ding, thumbs up always helps me get the content out there into the algorithm. And comments as well are really great. I like reading the comments, and I think as well, if something has touched you or moved you in the interview, it may help somebody else who's experiencing the same kind of thing. So it's always good to keep that conversation going. So do have a think about all of that, and I really hope that you enjoy the interview today. So for this season 2 opener, where do we begin? Well, as always, we're going to be delving into a creative mind to find out how creativity can really help us in our quest to perhaps better mental health. But also we are talking about breaking the blocks. What challenges have we had to face in our lives? What do we have to overcome? And so many of us do have issues in our life. That is the game of life that we all play. And it's always great when you can listen to other people who have been through similar things or been through things that you've never experienced, but perhaps you realize that other people are struggling at times in their lives. Because it can be so easy to sit there and feel like you are the only person on this planet who is going through something at the moment that you are going through. We are here to say on this channel, on this podcast, you are not alone. Lots of us have very dark times, but if we work through our issues, if we feel our feelings, if we talk about things, we can realize that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is healing to be done, and you can get through some of the darkest times in your life. I've had my issues. A lot of my guests have had problems, and I'm sure that you have as well. So let's have a listen now to Sherri Lynn Wood. She's a fantastic quilter, very much into sustainability, using secondhand fabrics. But it's not just about trying to save the planet, which of course is a great thing. There is a lot of new fabric out there that is discarded and wasted. But actually for Sherri Lynn, it's more about how the fabric resonates with her from within. It's about the memories, it's about the stories, it's about that connection, that human connection. And that's what Sherri Lynn was talking about in this interview. But also she talked about how she had overcome some blocks in her life, like losing her mother at a fairly young age. So let's delve into Sherri Lynn's life a little deeper. And at the very least, let's just give ourselves 50 minutes to listen to this podcast and to relax and to do something for ourselves, because it's so important that we do that. Enjoy the episode. Hello, lovely Sherri Lynn Wood.
Hello, Rachel. It's good to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. And we've only just started working together, but of course I've known about you for a long time because you have been in the quilting world for many, many years. Not that I want to make you sound really old or like a dinosaur. I don't think that at all. I think you've always been a bit of a leading light, particularly when it comes to sustainability. So we'll talk about all that in just a second. But obviously today, what I'd like to get to know is kind of behind what we see with Sherri Lynn Wood. So I want to talk to you about some of the blocks and the challenges that you faced and how you overcome them. And the idea is that for people listening, they might, find it inspirational what you say, and it could help them in their lives. So it's not always related to creativity because, of course, we all have blocks. Sherri Lynn, let's just talk a little bit about your work, first of all. Most of the people I've talked about, most quilters, they start off by making a traditional block. That's what I've found. This may not be, in your case, how it started. I'm intrigued as to how it started. But there aren't many, I don't think, that really make that full leap into sustainable quilting. A lot of people might use a little bit of fabric here and there that they've picked up. Maybe if they're making a memory quilt or a memory cushion or something. But it really is completely inherent within you. It's your thing, it's your passion, it's your drive. So what happened to make you switch, if you did switch, or did you always start with sustainable fabrics?
No, I didn't. I mean, I was like everyone else. I started with like a simple quilt block. In fact, I remember a Christmas way long ago, like when I was in my 20s, that my parents gave me like a little bundle of fat quarters with a pattern. And I made this. It was like a star point thing. It was my first quilt, but I had a lot of sewing skills. And then I just, got really interested in quilting and I mean, nowadays there's way more choices when you go to the fabric store than there was that long ago in the early 90s. And I remember working through, as I was a beginning quilter, through different types of fabrics. There were like the novelty prints that had like dogs or something on them. And then the solids, there were some solids, but there weren't as what wasn't as much of a range, mainly because I got bored with them. Like, after a while, I got bored of the sunflower novelty prints, and after a while, I got bored with the batiks. As I discovered quilting, art quilting was the big thing. The modern quilting didn't really exist at that point. And, if you go through some old Threads magazines, you'll see a whole thing about where I, did a whole different way of making a quilt, where I stitched the quilt together as I was piecing it and quilting it and building it on the sewing machine with layers and cutting through layers. All of that was exciting. But then one day, this woman, she just came, and I sold at the farmer's market, and she just came and said, brought her materials. She's like, my grandmother died, and I'd like to have a quilt made out of these materials of my grandmother's. And I was just like, wow. And that was so exciting and so meaningful to me. And I guess that was my first experience with thinking about sustainability and secondhand materials, although they were materials of meaning really specific to one person. I just was like, it shifted away from a sense of consumerism to a sense of service, that my practice was a sense of service now, rather than here, let me buy more materials, buy, because you end up buying so much to create the craft, and you have all these leftovers. This is meaningful. These materials are interesting. Like, she had the lining of an old sleeping bag, and her different clothing from her grandmother. And that really got me excited and kept me engaged. So working with secondhand materials became more engaging creatively. And I still, have printers cottons, and I've still used them. And I mix in my other materials with those. So I did the bereavement work, the memorial quilting, I call it passage quilting, for, a long, long time. And I'm still doing that work occasionally. But I, did an artist residency at the San Francisco Dump in 2016, and that was a whole nother level of sustainability and reuse, and finding materials and making quilts out of afghans and aprons and all kinds of things that carry meaning. It's just very, very exciting. So that's kind of how I shifted into it, and I think, yeah, it's just more interesting, and it's more meaningful to
Yeah.
reclaim those materials and make them into something new.
I was really interested when you took the class with me, Sherri Lynn, how you talked about really feeling from your heart about fabrics that you use. You said to people, when you pick up a bit of lace, if you don't have that feeling in your gut, then it's not right for you. And that really intrigued me because, yeah, I wasn't expecting it to come from such a personal place. I know it's obviously about saving the planet, but there's very much a kind of a resonance with you and about your sustainability, isn't there? Let's talk a little bit about that. What do you feel about that?
Well, it's always been a part of my thought about quilting, and my experience with quilting is that, especially because I'm an improviser, so I don't work with fixed patterns. I'm always, creating the patterns as I go. And there is a head aspect to us that likes to figure things out and think. But I think the best work comes from a more embodied experience where we are improvising from the heart. In fact, my newsletter is called Improv from the Heart, or from our gut, that we pay attention to what's on the inside, what resonates with us, as a way to give us light and guidance for what we really want to make and what's important to us. If you're getting into the creative process, it has to come from, well, it doesn't have to, but I mean, that's another mode of coming from a heart-centered place, a place of meaning, a place of residence. And there's more than one way to get at that. It's not just an activity in the head, it's an activity in our hands, it's an activity in our entire body, especially with craft.
I kind of feel like it's your soul's purpose, that you are working with these fabrics, because you were really passionate about it, and the way you spoke about it, as I say, about feeling it in the gut, feeling it in the heart. It's interesting that person that came along and just offered those fabrics to you and said, could you make something, out of these grandmother's fabrics? I do feel like sometimes we are put on the right path, aren't we? And do you
Yeah.
think that was one, do you think that was like kind of turning point really for you? And it was such an important moment, just this person who found you.
Yeah, it definitely was a real turning point. It helped me define my path as an artist. And I think, there's always these turning points too that come up that continue to refine it and shift and reinforce your sense of, why you're here and what you're doing. I will say quilting has always been from the very beginning a source of personal healing for me. Her coming to me just fit into that trajectory. It just amplified it and brought more awareness to, wait a minute, am I just consuming, am I just making product, or am I, acting and being a servant in some way to serve others for their, in whatever ways. And that's including my teaching, making those quilts with people, all of that kind of fits. And, when I finally went to art school many years later, once you go to art school, it just kind of blows up. It's like there's so many directions to go in. It's just overwhelming because, our interests, our minds, but there's only so much you can do. So it's like you've got to define, you've got to refine. And so I would always go back to those roots and to that trajectory of, this was in the beginning a healing process for myself before it ever became a professional activity. And this woman who brought these clothes to me was one point on that trajectory that kind of aligned, right? And so, we're already talking about a lot of different things that create blocks or things that create flow, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's the flow of life. I firmly believe that we're all on paths, and sometimes we stray from both those paths, and then things come along to put us onto the right path. So you've mentioned there that your quilting for you has helped you and in so many personal areas when it comes to healing. And I want to ask you about some of those times when you've needed that healing. One club that you're a member of, which is the same as me, is the loss of a parent. I lost my father last year, so I'm very early on in that process of grieving and how it affects your everyday life. I know you lost your mum quite some time ago now. Was that a major, sort of one of the first major blocks for you, do you think? One of the first difficult times, or were there times before that?
Me becoming an artist was started way before that. And actually, my mom dying was a real sacred time. I mean, she had cancer, so there was like a 6 month period while she was dying. And I spent that time at home with her and my father. And I mean, yes, it was excruciating in some ways, but it was also a moment in time where I felt totally exactly where I needed to be. Like I was right on my path. And, that those times of feeling that are very rare,
Mm,
for me at least.
yeah.
And I did a summer program at Bard College, an MFA program. So we only met in the summertime. And so I was between my second summer and my third summer, which would have been my last summer, was when my mom died. So when I came back to school for my third summer, my mom had died. And it was, I don't know, it was incredibly fruitful time period for me creatively because the feeling that I had, I think the emotional connection to that experience fueled me and gave me strength. And, you know, art school can be a difficult place, but boy, when I came back to art school after my second year and my third year, my mom had died, I was like, I'm not putting up with any crap from anyone. Like you can try to,
Yeah.
because everybody's like vying for their definition of what art is. And it's like, you can try
Yeah.
to smack me down as much as you want, but it's not going to work. I've got my
Yeah.
vision. I know what I'm doing and I'm going to do it no matter what. So I was really emboldened and intensely creative, through that period after my mom died. And that's just how it worked for me. I think, that kind of loss, it affects people in so many different ways. And uh, so, but I think that emotion is a big driving factor for me in creating. And if I am cut off from my emotional life for whatever reasons, which might have nothing to do with my creativity, that has to do with other elements, other things going on in my life, then that affects my ability to create. So that particularly period of time, I felt a lot of freedom. I felt a lot of emotion and love and connection, and it was a great time to be creative for me.
It's interesting that you say that. There are some songwriters who need to really feel quite depressed or have heartbreak in order to write their love songs or write their best songs. And I've read that, some songwriters say if everything is going right in their life, they kind of have songwriting block because they don't do happy songs, and then they need to, feel something bad. So it's interesting that you said emotion drives you. So do you feel that your work is any different when you're coming at it from, a kind of an emotionally driven place, which has come from a loss or a sadness or something not quite being right in your life? Is there a difference, or can you see it
Uh,
in your work?
I don't know. Let's see. I don't think that I have to be in a dreary place to create. I think that depression, though, is for me is definitely a block. If I am depressed, it really keeps me from creating. If I'm feeling depressed, and sometimes I do struggle with depression. And when I first started quilting, though, I was coming out of a depression, and the stitching and everything really helped. And I had a big shift. I had a big identity shift, and I had to get to know who I was again. And so, yeah, I think it triggers more when there's a little bit. It's a great thing. Like that's what's so wonderful about stitching. Just a little bit of stitching can often begin to build. It's a little step, and sometimes that little step will help you take another step and another step. And so, that's the thing. You want to get out of that, downward spiral. But when I'm deep down in it, it can be difficult to do anything. But quilting, mending, I did a lot of mending in my blog. My early blog was called Dainty Time. I started in 2010. I did a lot of mending, a lot of visual mending then, and that was a really good time of healing, those little repairs that we make. And I think that can build as we're engaging in creative acts and embodied acts where we're working with our hands and that sort of thing. So for me, quilt making and making patterns has always been a life practice. And it has to do with the way we make relationships. So also, I just feel really engaged when I'm like learning about myself. When I'm making quilts and making decisions, I'm learning something about myself. I'm learning where my boundaries and where my limits are. And, whether I want to stay within those limits or I want to push them further or push past them. I facilitate an online community. It's really a creative mentoring space, and it's a community mentoring space. So Brave Patches is more of, focused, intentional space, I guess is what I'm saying, can be a way to overcome that kind of block where you're creating an isolation and you're really sharing. Anyways, in the last Brave Patch group, I did an I Ching reading and I talked about that. It's the I Ching on small exceeding. It's, and what that just means is that, you just take little steps. You cross a line. When you exceed, you cross a line. But this isn't talking about crossing a big line. It's the idea of the small connections, one step at a time. You commit one step at a time. And then those small steps, those small crossing the lines, a small exceeding, if you keep that flowing, if you keep that going, it brings great good success.
You know, Sherri Lynn, I did some hypnotherapy quite some time ago now because I went through a period of, it just hit me. It was like panic attacks and insomnia, and I'd never had any of this stuff, and it just came out of nowhere. I think it was hormonal. As I was coming to the end of this hypnotherapy, which was brilliant, and I said to Tony, so I want to start this business. And I feel like I've got all these ideas swirling around my head, and I can't grab at them. I feel like I'm in some movie and I'm going like this, and I can't grab at these ideas. What do I do? And he said, okay, what would you like to do in your life that's a journey of some nature? And I very quickly said, well, I would really like to drive from San Francisco down to LA. I want to go on that coastal road. That's one thing I really want to do. And he said, brilliant, that's brilliant. He said, now, if you were to say, okay, I'm going to set off and I'm going to get there and I'm going to be there by this time, and it would start panicking you because you'd be like, well, where do I turn on the way? And he said, so what you have to imagine is you're going to set off and you're going to get to LA, but you don't know how long it's going to take you. You don't know when you're going to get there. But what you are going to do is just take lots of pit stops on the way. So you might pull over and have a picnic. And the next day you might take a turn down here. And if the turn is wrong, doesn't matter. You saw the village, didn't like it, turn around, come back, get back on that road. He said, you just literally plan little tiny stops. So today I'm going to drive for an hour and I'm going to see where it takes me. Don't think about what it's going to be like in LA and how you're going to get there and where you're going to stay when you get there. He said, think about the first bit of the drive and how exciting, because you don't know what that drive's going to bring you. So, and it's the same as what you're saying there. It's about taking those small steps. And it's absolutely worked for me. If ever I just think of the end product, it's too big. It's too big. So you just have to take a small step at a time.
That's exactly. Yeah. And I call it with quilting, when we're doing quilting together, was like, it's, you commit one step at a time, which means to sew.
Yeah.
You sew that. If you like that, you sew it. And then there's a lot of different approaches to how you can improvise a piece. And some people will like to make all the blocks and then move them around. And that can be great. I use a combination, but sometimes if I do that too much, I get what I call, it's like online dating, where you can't make a decision because it's like, it starts to look like you've got so many options and you're keeping all your options open and you're never going to get anywhere. And like, stop online dating your quilt, just like make a commitment to something you like, one little thing that you like, sew those pieces together, and then take a look and find the next thing that you want to sew. And as you go, and that takes a little bit of paying attention to your internal prompts, what you resonate with in your gut, your heart, and your brain. But it takes some listening as well as some responding to get there and to have that, because there's nobody saying, this is the right way to do it. This is the right way to take your trip. This is the turn you're supposed to take. I mean, you can follow GPS if you want, but GPS doesn't even get it right all the time. You want to go, when you're going on an explorative trip, you're going to see this little town and you'll say, hey, let me check that out. And then you pay attention to how it impacts you. You liked it. You want to keep going down this country road, or do I want to get on the freeway? you pay attention to that inner urge, right? To
Exactly. It's listening to your instincts, isn't it? Which I would imagine is the same for you, as you've just said there. When you're quilting, you have to listen to your instincts. So, how do you shut off? I mean, I know we've got to use our brains, but I think, we have to listen to our hearts and our gut instinct more than we do our brains, because our brains can, it's all about the ego. The ego wants to keep us in check. Don't try this. We want to be safe. We don't want to make a mess. We don't want to be embarrassed. So, let's stay inside the lines. So let's not listen to the ego. The ego is good a little bit, but we need to be listening to our souls. So how do you close down those kinds of voices in your head, as it were? How do you feel this instinct? Where is it coming from?
yeah, there's so many things I could say to that. Let's see. The first thing I would say is we get centered and we connect with our center. You gotta at first have the intention to listen. When you hear those voices, you're exactly right when you say the ego gets in and all of that. You listen to them, and it's important though to accept them and just say, I hear you. I hear you're scared about doing this. I know you're protecting me. I know and kind of like invite them into sit and watch you sew. It's like, you can be there, but I'm going to do this. So, having a gentle attitude towards those kind of internal voices that might try to shut you down is helpful, because you can't really cut them off. They're going to be there, but recognizing them and acknowledging how they might have served you in the past can be helpful. Often when we are crossing a boundary, when we're exceeding a line, our negative impulses come in because it's unfamiliar. And often I think it might be an instinctual biological thing. If we're on the edge of the unknown, we feel a little fear. We want to think about all the solutions, how to get out of it. We think about all the bad things that could happen.
There's so many things that you said there that you can absolutely relate to people who are not quilters. I mean, people who they may be watercolor artists, but people who don't craft. There are so many life lessons in there, because three things. First of all, you mentioned about listening to that voice that is the fearful voice, the ego voice. And I remember when I did my hypnotherapy that my therapist said to me, when you're having these panic attacks, the worst thing to do is to try and shut that voice out, because what that voice is doing is trying to warn you there is danger. And that's why it gets louder and louder and you have a panic attack. So what you have to do is say, I'm listening to you. I understand you're trying to warn me, which is what you just said. And we're okay. We're safe. And then that voice will go, well, you're listening to me. Oh, well, I can start being quiet again then now. Now I know you're listening, which is exactly what you're talking about with the creative process. Okay, I'm listening to you, but we're just going with the flow here. Everything is fine. The second thing is, I was reminded of Alan Rickman, the sadly departed Alan Rickman, the actor, who someone said to him, what advice would you give to actors? And he said, listen. And I think this interviewer said, I'm sorry, I am listening to you. He said, no. I'm saying you have to listen as an actor. If you're constantly thinking about what your next line is, you're not going to react to what the person is doing in front of you. So true. Again, with quilting, listen to yourself, listen to what you want to do, go with that flow, listen, and then just keep working. And then the next thing you said was about looking at the positives, which is what we have to do in our lives. Because if we focus on the negatives, they will increase. We will get more negative things in our lives. So let's try and focus on the positives, because then the positives grow. And then you can forget the little negative bits, because they're always going to be there. We're always going to have pain. We're always going to have heartache. There's always going to be something that's going to upset us. But you have to focus on the positive. And the final thing was, I was reminded of David Bowie and a quote that he said, which was very similar to what you said. When you are on the edge, when you're creating and you're on the edge and you are starting to get into unknown territory and that fear steps in, that is when you start creating the best stuff. That's when the good stuff comes, when you're scared a little bit. Leap for it, go into it. So all those things you said can be absolutely related to regular life to help us get through any block that we have.
It's true. And, I think of that, so many other things that popped up. That edge, the David Bowie edge, is that, shifting that negative, like anxiety, to curiosity, and recognizing that those negative predictions are just predictions. So you're just saying, well, I wonder what will happen if I just leave that yellow there, or if I put
Yes.
more yellow in, or, and you start to come up with this, you shift it. Like anxiety and curiosity, they're very, can be very similar in the body experience. And there's just a little bit of a shift that you make into curiosity. And that's where you go into, that creative space. And this is another thing that I think really helps me get over blocks, is it's not all about me, especially when I'm improvising. It's you collaborating with the patchwork itself. So it begins to have its own voice. And this is why I love working with secondhand materials too. It's not just about what I want to do with them, about the pattern I want to create with them. It's not all about me. It's about the materials themselves and the shapes, the colors, what they want to do. So when I begin to make patchwork, as soon as I make something or piece something together, it has a life of its own that's separate from me. And then I begin to listen. So to it, not to just what's going on in my head or my heart or my gut. I'm listening to the patchwork itself. So it takes some of the burden off of me as the creator, thinking that it's all my show. It's not. I can be more of a facilitator to allow the voice of this patchwork to come through. If you're in a conversation with a group of people, a half a dozen things might be mentioned, but which one do you pick up on? And then you build on the conversation, and somebody else builds on the conversation. So you're not in charge of all of the outcome. You're just in charge of listening and responding and interacting and collaborating with that moment. And I think that can take a lot of the pressure of the blank slate away that can often freeze people. I think that collaboration and listening to the patchwork itself and being more of a facilitator can help with a sense of flow.
Yeah, and once again, Sherri Lynn, that's a lesson for life. Go with the flow. If you try and, go against the flow of life, you're just going to be going up a stream the wrong way. And that's going to be really hard work. So
That
you
is
have to
hard.
go with the flow. So if something goes wrong, you have to go with it. You have to feel it. You have to feel the emotions when you're going through that thing. If you try and close those emotions down, they're going to come back and bite you in the bum. So you have got to, that's what we say over here. So you've got to go through it. You've got to listen and feel and heal and learn and, absolutely go with it. So I would say, listening to you, Sherri Lynn, that one of your biggest inspirations, I think, is people. I think people inspire you to keep going and doing what you're doing. Would you say that's true? And are there any other inspirations for you?
Yeah, I do. I think people and the interactions and relationships are really at the core of everything. The relationships, with my creative work, are the relationships that I make between color or pattern, how I piece. And that informs me on the way I make relationships in life with other people within the communities that I'm engaged with. That does inspire me, and that is kind of the focus of my work, and that's what I've always tried to share with others. And I've had that sense of quilting and stitching because it was so healing for me. I've always had a sense that that is the gift that I have to give back to others, and that's made a big difference. It's funny, I went to this thing last week here in Cincinnati. It's about collective collective action and interchange and collective change and things like that. And then we were all sitting around casually talking, and it just, there's a lot of talk these days, and you see it in the craft community too, about trauma and healing. That happened after 9/11 too, but not to the same degree as it did with COVID, because COVID was worldwide. There's been this awareness with, racial inequities that came out during COVID, and all of the things, all the new awareness. It's always been there. Environmental problems that we've created. It's been there for a long time. We all knew it was coming, kind of. But then it really hit, and we realized, oh, we're in the midst of system collapse right now. It's not like going to happen in the future. Like it. I think different people have acknowledged system collapse for a long time, but COVID made everybody acknowledge it all at the same time, if at least for a moment. Maybe we're forgetting it now, or we're going to start to forget it again, but it's still there in a more present way than it ever has been before. And I do believe that, the creative actions that we take are part of the mending and the healing that we can make. And then there's outer change. There can't be outer change without inner change. And without outer change, there's no change matters. That's a famous saying. And I think that the little actions that we take by being creative can make a big impact on our agency to interact in the world and to continue to engage in the world. And so back in the 2008 or 9, I remember teaching at Penland School of Craft, and it was a specific session on social practice, and I was doing the passage quilting class then. And I remember making a comment that I saw myself as a healer. And oh my God, I mean, there was some board member there, or I can't remember who it was, but someone with a little bit of authority. And he just like kind of ridiculed me, like, you call yourself a healer? Isn't that a little weird? Like, you could call yourself an activist, but can you call yourself a healer? That's just not an art or craft term. And I was kind of surprised. I mean, I didn't think of that it was. I mean, clearly I was doing healing with the memorial bereavement work. It was like pretty as plain as day. But the thing is that people didn't really acknowledge that as a valid definition of art, maybe. And now that's what we're all talking about. We're all talking about healing, and how craft and how art and how making are acts of healing, and how we can retell our stories, how we can envision new worlds and new solutions and things like that through our creative activity. So it's very interesting to see how these trends shift and change, and I'm happy to see that more and more people are connecting with the idea that our making allows us to heal ourselves and to help heal our communities.
I totally agree with you. I feel the same thing. I mean, when you say it, you sound quite egotistical. I'm here to be a healer, which is not at all what you mean. And I totally get what you mean. And in a way, I feel the same, in that one of my biggest inspirations is bringing people together. And I love it when you see the joy in people, when you see the change in people. And as you said, it starts with one small change. It's like a ripple. It's like you put the pebble in the water and it ripples out. And I've got the YouTube channel where I do a weekly tutorial, just a little crafty exercise for anybody to join in. And one lady last week wrote, "Thank you so much for this video. You have filled my heart with joy today." That's all she wrote. And that was just like, that's amazing. I've made one person in the world feel happier by something I've done. And then she will go off with that joy in her heart and probably say something to someone in a shop or ring a friend. "I just felt like ringing you today because she's in a good place." And guess what? Then that friend is feeling happier, or that person in the shop is. It's all about, you think that by sitting here and doing something in your studio, are you affecting anybody? But actually you are. and the people you're affecting are affecting people. So I totally
Yeah.
get what you mean. It is healing. Creativity is healing. And I've had this conversation with so many amazing artists like yourself who said that if they had a penny or a dollar for every time someone said to them, "Oh, but I'm not creative." And it's not true. We're all born creative, and then somewhere we lose it. But I do believe that we're all born creative, and it doesn't have to be quilting. You know, Victoria Vanderland was saying if you put on a nicely coloured hat and a scarf, you're being creative with colour. You're being creative with how you look. You're walking out in the world and making a statement. That's being creative. So I do think it's being creative. Be a creative thinker, you know. So I think creativity comes in many forms.
Yeah, I do too. And I think, what you're doing with bringing community together is so important. I just heard on the radio how loneliness is one of the big factors right now in health as a health issue. And, you know, there even because our identity structures have so broken down, one of the ways that we can repair that in new ways where we have identity is to find the things that we love to do and find the communities that we love to do them with. And that's part of what you're doing
Yeah.
with your work.
And what you're doing with your work. Look at
Yeah.
us healing the world, Sherri Lynn. We're healing the world. What is there for you to learn, Sherri Lynn, about yourself? I'm learning patience. What's your thing that you're learning?
It's so funny you say that. People always say to me when I was younger, when I'd sit at the farmer's market working on the quilt, like, you're so patient. And I'm like, exactly opposite. I'm so impatient. I don't know why stitching a quilt. I guess that's part of the way I, dealt with my impatience. But it's funny how stitching and sewing is connected with this idea of patience. I think you can learn patience from doing it. I really try to help folks with perfectionism and letting go of perfectionism, but I have such a hard time doing that with myself, and it gets me stuck in so many ways. So I'm always going to be working on that. I'm always going to be working on just acceptance, self acceptance, uh, gentleness. Lately I've been really working on ways to be more gentle with myself and with others. I'm probably gentler with others than I am with myself. And, I'm really working a lot with thinking about aging and what that means because I am at a point where I'm feeling the sense of limits like I've never felt before in terms of, how many more years will I live? I don't know if I thought about that much I did occasionally think, what would it be like when you're like, get this old and you only know that you might only live another year or another 10 years or another 5 years. But it was still so abstract. But this last decade went so fast and I know that the next decade will go even faster. So and I'm having friends starting to die. And, that's a whole nother level it's just another life stage. And it's just interesting entering that and thinking about what that means and what I have to learn from this time period, what I have to let go of from my past or from my identity that I had in the past as a creator and as a person. And, how do I want to envision my life going forward from here with those limits and those differences? My energy level is different. There's definitely some ageism and that you face. There's all kinds of things about being an older woman that is, more in your face than ever before. So that's, that's kind of interesting. It's kind of like, oh, that's a new thing to engage with and to explore and learn and figure out. what it means for me, and, what if I can be a guide in some that, for me, it's just new territory. So I don't know if I will be, if I will have any useful information about it, but I'm learning from others. I'm learning from other women that are older. I love, one of my favorite artists is Margaret Fabrizia. I think she's in her 90s and she's a powerhouse. I love, following her on Instagram and being inspired by her. She's based in San Francisco. So, anyways, that's kind of where I am with my creative life right now, and it's been a big shift. It's I'm reassessing a lot of things and trying to understand, what my voice is like and who I am at this age.
Yeah, I'm with you on the definitely, well, many things that you say. Um, but definitely the ageism, and as you say, getting older, you just can't, you can't imagine it until you start experiencing it. As you say, it's the energy levels. It's how, easily you can put your back out, and it wasn't like that when you were younger. You could just do everything. And I find myself watching people on TV, if they're jumping about, and I think, oh, I wish I could do that, because I'm not saying I can't jump about, but I can't jump about like I used to do. But I think the ageism thing, and I think being a woman who is aging, it is difficult. It is difficult because I'm not sure. I mean, this is a whole other podcast, but I'm not sure if it's because as a younger woman, there is a sexual power there. There is there definitely is something there that we lose as we get older. And I've spoken to my male friends who are my age in their 50s, and they've said to me, but you're kind of blooming, Rachel, right now. And I've said, yeah, but I'm really having to mourn the loss of who I used to be physically 25 years ago. And it's hard to lose that younger you. But as I say,
It
it's
is.
interesting from the male perspective that they're saying to me, but you're blooming. You're probably looking better than you ever did because you've got this inner confidence. You're doing what you love now. You've found your soul's purpose. And I get all that. I do. And I certainly do feel more happy, in a much more contented place than I've ever been. I feel like I know myself now. And actually, that's only come in the last few months. I kind of know myself now. But I do mourn the younger me and the physical attributes and the kind of, the way that things were. But as I say, that's a whole other issue.
I think we can bloom at any age for
Yeah,
sure,
absolutely
and
agree.
there's no doubt about that.
It's
And
adjustment, isn't it? It's adjustment.
it's just
That's
adjustment.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So, as a final note, I always ask my lovely artist this: do you have a motto for your life? I mean, you've kind of given us all of your mottos, Sherri Lynn. I mean, be positive, think positive, don't listen to the ego, da 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 da. But is there an actual phrase, a motto, anything that you would say?
I guess one of the things that I've been using a lot with, my own life and work is, may your creativity lead you to more truth and love. And I think that, if it's not, what's the point in doing it? It's like, it's about, for me, it's like, I want to have more truth in my life, more love and acceptance in my life. And it's, I guess, about acceptance. And so I would say that would be the motto that or the mantra that I'm
Yeah,
listening to
yeah, I
these
love that.
days.
I love that as a motto. And just to go back to the being older as well, I think as you get older, you begin to weed out the non-genuine relationships, the acquaintances, or you say very much to those acquaintances. You begin to realize who your real friends are, what you want out of a genuine friendship, and you seek out those genuine friendships and you value them. And you realize what is not genuine in your life has to go. What is not serving you has to go. And it's a difficult transition, but I think as you get older, you begin to learn that.
Yeah, and I think you can say that not just with friends, but with your creative practices. Like, are you doing this for Instagram followers? Are you doing this, to make money? Are you doing this, why are you making this thing? And why is it important to you to make it at this time? And you start to hone in on that. And maybe you don't know what that is. And I know a lot of people that really are stuck on a more long-term way that, and I have that experience too, where you got to really reassess what's important about creating and why you're creating it.
Mm. And where do you think that will go for you, Sherri Lynn? Where do you think your creativity is going to take you?
I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of my creativity's been in my workshops these days, which, that is a really valid form of creating experiences, spaces for others to learn creativity. And it's actually been really rewarding and a lot of fun. And, but I'm also looking into, maybe stepping back a little bit from that and finding a little more space for doing something different. Maybe quilts, maybe not quilts, but probably something in textiles for sure.
Mm. I shall await the future, Sherri Lynn Wood, the next trip, the next journey. Yeah, no, it's been lovely to talk to you. And I really do agree with you on so many things. And even though I don't sit and make quilts and I don't sit and sew, I absolutely can apply many of the things that you've just said to my own life. And that's what I'm trying to get across on this podcast through talking to amazing people like you. That first of all, creativity can be for anyone, but also there are lessons to be learned, that you guys have gone through when you've had those blocks that people can learn in their regular lives. But I wish you all the best. And if anybody is listening who wants to, join in with you, you've always got lots going on. So all the details will be there about how to go to your website, look at the classes. You've got an amazing season coming up at the beginning of 25, and this will be going out around then. So people should definitely check you out. But yeah, it's been lovely. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
It has. Take care.
Thank you.
Just before you go, lovely listener, can I ask you a favour? If you have a friend who you think would enjoy listening to this podcast, would you mind please telling them about it? It helps me to spread the word, and you never know, they might get a life lesson out of it, or at the very least, just have a lovely 40 minutes of relaxing time for themselves. The second thing to say is that if you have enjoyed this, it would really help me if you would give me a little quick like or a comment, especially if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms. It just means that when anybody lands on the page, they can see that people have reviewed it, they've liked it, enjoyed it, and got something out of it. So if you wouldn't mind leaving me a review, that would be amazing. And the final thing to say is that if you are a business and you're thinking, how do I get my message out there? Well, you could do it on this podcast. All you have to do is reach out to me, rachel@breakingtheblocks.com. The details are below in the box. Thank you so much to everybody for listening and enjoying and saying the lovely things that you're saying.